I have everyone do when they're involved in a buying cycle is I'm going to ask you to just spend 10, 15 minutes in a doc and give me your must haves and your nice to haves. Write them down for me. I now want you to record yourself narrating what you wrote down. Two things are going to happen. You're going to add context, or
Hmm.
you may introduce something that didn't make it on paper the first time. And now I have two really rich sources of perspective. And then I take both of those and I give that to GPT and I say, okay, go ahead and synthesize all of that together to come out with
Hmm,
a really cool list of requirements. And
cool.
that's what we then hold vendors against.
What's up, folks? Today we have the pleasure of sitting down with Keith Jones, head of GTM Systems at OpenAI. Before joining OpenAI, Keith's been Senior Director Analyst for RevTech at Gartner, and he's also led GTM Systems at Mural. In this episode, we cover why data dictionaries, syntax, and prompt engineering will prevail, why agents work best after you've translated instincts into clear steps, how a ritual of GTM ghost stories can turn pain into pattern recognition, why AI is rewriting, not killing Martech, and why the buying process should look a lot less like a spreadsheet and more like a cognitive extraction exercise. All that and a bunch more stuff after a super quick word from two of our awesome partners, and just a quick disclaimer that Keith is joining the podcast as Keith, the technologist and human, not the employee at OpenAI. The views and opinions he expresses in this episode are his own and do not represent OpenAI. This episode is brought to you by MoEngage and their new Warehouse Native CEP, which revolutionizes the way data should be seamlessly fetched, analyzed, and activated. Now you can use MoEngage Cloud Data Sync to sync your warehouse data with MoEngage and use it to segment audiences or personalize messages without any development. Just set and forget. Use MoEngage warehouse segments to create segments on your warehouse data without moving underlying events, properties, or proprietary segmentation logic, and activate them directly on MoEngage. Using warehouse data analytics, brands can also directly generate insights from their warehouse data. Your long search solution for seamless data sync, smarter segmentation, dynamic personalization, and delightful customer experiences ends here. Warehouse Native CEP from MoEngage, making it easy, smart, and secure. Learn more at moengage.com.
This episode is brought to you by Revenue Hero. You've invested thousands in your marketing funnel, targeted the right ICP, spent weeks A/B testing, and optimized for conversion at every step. Finally, a high-intent prospect fills out your demo form, and then nothing. Your nurtured lead sits in a queue while you chase them with, "How's Thursday at 2 p.m.?" Meanwhile, your competitor is already on a discovery call. That's not just frustrating, that's revenue walking away. With Revenue Hero, you can qualify, route, and book leads with the right rep, so your team can start real conversations right away. For the ops folks listening, Revenue Hero syncs meeting data to your CRM, auto-credits no-shows, recalibrates when reps go on vacation, and has a ton of smart features you won't find anywhere else. If you're spending to drive demand, don't lose it at the last mile. Visit revenuehero.io/demo today.
Keith, thank you so much for your time today. Really pumped to chat.
Hey, Phil, really glad to be here down in from an easy breezy 59-degree day here in New York City.
Keith, you've had like a lot of different roles in your career, and I'd love for you to like riff a little bit on them. It sounds like you were an operator, then you went into sales, then you went into systems and sales ops. I've also been in sales. Did you like being in sales ops? What kind of brought you to really fall in love with the type of work that you're doing right now? Tell us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to talk about that. So I always like to tell this story a little bit with that I fell into ops by accident. I was given a sales role when I probably didn't deserve one, and then found my way back to ops where I belong.
Mm.
Um, I was hired very early on at a rapidly growing healthcare company, and I didn't even know if you had said, "Hey, you should consider a career in sales operations." I would have responded with, "What is sales operations?" And I would have said that question weeks and even months into that job. My title was business operations associate. I was doing forecasting in Excel on behalf of this business on like our bookings and revenue based on like shipping projections. I got a chance to tailor a couple of different processes, things like that. But that same company put me in a sales role. They wanted to put more people in sales from inside the company, which is why I got a shot at doing that. So next thing I knew, I was this field sales rep working for this healthcare company, meeting with CIOs and chief nursing officers in the southeast. I moved to Atlanta for that, and what I love about that role, and later on when I would make my breakthrough into what I just kind of refer to as startup land, my first startup where I was employee number 8, also hired as an account executive there, is that I gained a lot of empathy for sellers throughout that journey, right? It was at the healthcare company that I got my first exposure to Salesforce and CRMs, really like lightweight deployments of sales tech. And that kind of started this journey in my mind of just like I see a way forward to make a really cool career here doing this. It took me a little bit while to really kind of get my footing, if you will, but I'll always remember how hard that job was
Mm.
and how
Hmm.
much I had to try to command my own destiny, right? Like,
Yeah.
yes, I was given tools. Yes, I was given quota. Yes, I was given some direction. I had a manager and a one-on-one and expectations and make sure your deals are in CRM and all of that. So like, not completely out on my own, but definitely not given a ton of training or a ton of like real-time guidance or continuous education. And many go-to-market organizations are much better than the ones I had the opportunity to work in today, but it is a really hard job to do. And so I always try to keep that at the forefront of my mind now in systems when we're trying to design these solutions and walk that balance between what the business needs versus what the seller needs, right? Because those two things can sometimes be competitive in a sense. So yeah, it just, it was a really wonderful experience. I love it that I got to do both. I'll never do sales again. But it's I stand by one particular testimony, which is I think the best operators are former revenue influencers, salespeople,
Yeah.
customer success. Like you just can't replace that empathy.
Very cool. So cool to hear. I feel like the job was even harder like 10, 12 years ago when you were doing that, when there wasn't ChatGPT and you couldn't have someone to bounce ideas off or have like a sales assistant, so to speak. Like I am full time on the podcast now and I have a big sales role to kind of like pay the bills now and find sponsorships. And I rely on ChatGPT so much for having like I've got a custom GPT that's just like my sales director, and he's giving me advice on scripts for like my media kit, how I chat with folks, and the job is so tough. It's really really hard, and yeah, like I totally get what you said. Like building that empathy for sales, it's a really tough job. No kidding. You were
Mhm.
sales too, Daryl? I actually didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know if this resonates with you, Keith, but I felt like when I was selling one to one, right? I would always feel like, man, this deck sucks, or man, this process sucks, and like I wish I could just fix it for everyone. And like
Hmm.
that was like the thing that kind of got me to like I couldn't just um I wasn't satisfied just talking one to one with a person. I wanted to help
Hmm.
many people. And that was like sort of my transition
Hmm.
into marketing, because marketing is one to many versus sales is
Hmm.
one to one. And then ultimately to system. Does that resonate with you at all?
Oh, 100%. And
Yeah.
actually, funny enough, that actually is what organically resulted in the first step of my transition back into more pure operational and systems roles. So I'm at this early stage startup, data as a service offering in Atlanta, Georgia. Hired as employee number 8. I'm like the second or third account executive. I can't quite remember today. And I got to know the product pretty quickly. I'm not the most technical person in the world, right? I can't code to save my life, but I do have, a bit of the brain of an engineer, right? Like I understand the concepts. A lot of that does come rather naturally to me, and so I got to know the product really well. And before I knew it, as we were hiring more and more salespeople at this startup, I was finding myself teaching people about the product. And I love that. And like to your point of like, I didn't want to just be good at speaking to marketers who we sold to at a technical level, what our data product did, I wanted everyone to be good at that. And what do you know it? CEO pulls me aside one day, says, "Come to my office," and he goes, "Hey, listen, I need to tell you something. You're really bad at cold calling. You're terrible at it. Like, and you don't even do it very often." And I was like, "You're right. I hate that job.
Yeah.
I'm also really introverted, so like that makes sense."
Oh.
And he's like, "But you know the product better than anyone else on the floor." He's like, "So here's what I'm thinking we should do. You should be our first ever sales engineer, where you're gonna
Mhm.
actually do the
Mm.
technical demo and do the proof of concept. How does that sound to you?" And I'm like, "Absolutely, let's do it." And he goes, "Oh, and by the way, our Salesforce admin quit. You want to learn Salesforce too?"
There you go.
So that's how
There
I
you
got back
go.
into sales ops and sales engineering. So yeah, it totally resonates.
Very cool.
Yep.
So GTM Systems now at
Hmm.
OpenAI, and you were GTM in that kind of role when you're at Mural
Yeah.
as well. You got to get a whole overview of the landscape when you were an analyst at Gartner. What is GTM Ops versus GTM Systems? How is it different for marketing ops and sales ops? Just curious your take there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the easy answer is that it depends, right? Depends on the organization, depends on the philosophy and perspective of the leaders overseeing those respective functions. But if I had to give like a dictionary definition for them, I would say that, the ops side of the equation is more about the field facing, field enablement, process innovation, continuous education of like making sure that the field and its leaders. And when I say the field, I'm talking about folks in sales, maybe the individual marketers, product marketing, whatever have you, that they have what they need and that you're working with them in partnership to be that operational counterpart, right? But then in go to market systems, we're more of the folks that, for better or worse, are kind of behind the scenes, right? We're behind the pain of the third and first party technology that's being used by those individuals every day. But that's a very different kind of work and requires deep focus and needs to be done in a really methodical way. I mean, you can get by doing it quickly and haphazard, but eventually, especially at scale, it will come back to bite you. And so I think it's a perfect balance at the end of the day. My team, for example, both at Mural and now here at OpenAI, we rely heavily on our colleagues in the operational teams to feed us the guidance of what the field needs so that we can then build the right solutions on behalf of them. A system team could do that top to bottom, but the reality is, if you want to do the technical work as well as you need to, you can really benefit from this sort of yin and yang, if you will, of ops versus systems. Not really a versus, not a competition. We're side by side at OpenAI, we were side by side at Mural. That's my favorite combination.
Yeah, I think there's also like amount of or like amount or volume of work that is component of this because
Mm,
at smaller companies sometimes you can just do both. Like, oh,
yes.
I can run the CRM, I can run the map, and I can talk to salespeople,
And
and
I
I can
and I
talk to
and I
marketers.
did both for 3
Yep.
jobs in a row, but
Mm,
all of
Yeah.
those companies were just a few hundred people,
right.
Yep.
and at one case, I had a sales team that was just low double digits, right? So, like, you're right, they're like, you can do both, but if the volume of work and scale is there, eventually they
Yeah.
have to be separate functions.
Yeah, yeah. And the ops role, I think, if you're taking the tech away from it, is like really critical. And it doesn't really I agree with you. Like it doesn't really matter. It's not like uh you're not competing. To be honest, the ops people could sit on the team on the systems team just maybe like as a separate group. Like,
Mhm.
it doesn't matter where they sit. The more important thing is, you know, do they understand what the business needs are? And do they understand what the people in the field need? And can you translate that to technical requirements?
Yep.
And working together, yeah, I think you're right on. That's a really good way to put it.
Let's chat about agent eruption in GTM,
Mm,
Keith. We'd be remiss by not having
of
someone
course.
from OpenAI and not talking about AI agents. There's a post every day that someone's writing about this eruption and tons of confusion around the space. Lots of excitement and definitely a bit of FOMO when it comes to AI agents. But I'd just love to give you the floor and let you share what you think is happening in this space with agents, where you think we're going. Specifically, like what's vaporware? What should folks know that is kind of not really serious? And what do you think is legit?
Yeah. So I think, where we are today in terms of the technology landscape, right? Um, the agent offerings that are on the market or are coming to market that are really of further investigation, if you will, at least this is my own personal perspective, are the ones that are being set up, sold, configured to do, let's just call it the more robotic tasks that us as humans and those in sales and marketing have had to do for a very long time, right? The things that are very clearly if this, then that, or turnkey, perhaps, right? Because that's what agents are going to be really good at, right? Now, as the technology becomes more and more sophisticated, and as anyone who's followed OpenAI has seen, right? Like the models just keep getting better, right? That paradigm will continue to shift, right? And eventually the agents will have near or even better human level intelligence, but at the same time, they won't always have the same context, right? So, and I've seen this take on LinkedIn and elsewhere, and I really do agree with it that if you're going to try to do anything involving some version of agentic orchestration, whether you're trying to build it yourself with technology like what OpenAI offers or through a third party vendor who's, making a big push for this sort of thing, you have to be really confident in what I'll call the less sexy elements of any deployment, right? All the things that we're all being honest, we know we need to do and we probably could do better, but especially if you're in hyper growth or early stage, you might count them more of a luxury than a necessity, right? And I'm talking about things like having really clear, understandable definitions of what the different data means in your organization, having a consistent level of syntax for that data, right? When I say X equals Y, I need to say that every single time. And then in addition to that, you need to make sure your data is as consistent, tagged, categorized, codified as much as possible because again, the agents, aren't there yet where they can, fill in some of the gaps that the human brain is capable of doing today, right? And so you've got to make these things more mechanical in nature, if you will. The models will get better. They'll be able to make more and more educated guesses or informed decisions as we go. But where we're at today is that you've got to have your stuff in order, and if you want to deploy anything, so I wouldn't say that there's a end all be all dictionary definition of this is vaporware, this isn't. I would just say you have to have these things in place, and you should be trying to deploy them to do these types of things. If you're trying to do other things, then like all power to you. Like the innovation will come, and I think it'll be here sooner than we know it. But that's where it's a little more conceptual at this stage, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's the great advice and music to the ears of ops folks who have been trying to get those foundation pieces in place for a decade, and now everyone's screaming about AI, and we need to get AI in place, and the ops team finally has a really good case to build for data quality and
Yeah.
data dictionaries and all the stuff you kind of talked about there.
But
I'm curious.
well, real quick, what's
Yeah,
a
yeah.
really interesting point though is that even where the technology is today can help accomplish a lot of that,
Hmm.
right? Because
Mhm.
some of that is somewhat menial or mundane in nature, right? It's a lot of, read through this, analyze this, come up with definitions. We built our entire data dictionary using our technology because you can trust the models to make elementary sort of level assumptions of, oh, I see this field is called XYZ. I think it's this, right? And you can shortcut the journey to having all of that stuff in order with that technology
Very cool. Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of dog feeding from the
every day.
ChatGPT tech that you guys are using internally. They're all in our power users, but I on this like agent thing, like there's one question I have in my head that's like around the orchestration layer. Like I chat with a lot of listeners and folks that work in GTM and in ops, and there's like everyone is keeping tabs on this like race for this orchestration layer, and a lot of folks are confused about where this is going. And I'm curious to get your take on this. Like every Martech vendor is integrating agent capabilities inside of their tooling, whether they're connecting directly to OpenAI or recalibrating like their own value props and trying to build something homegrown. Like, what advice do you have for Martech or systems pros that are thinking of this future or maybe even like current reality for a lot of folks where there's a ton of complexity exploding with AI agents from different vendors with their own orchestration logic. Like some folks have said, we're almost going to become like AI referees where we need to decide to turn it on in this tool, turn it off in that tool. All for customer success, we'll use this tool. Like maybe chat about like how do we work in an enterprise environment when every tool in your Martech stack is saying like turn on the AI for this tool.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll say, initially that it ultimately will come down to what you want to do. But the guidance that I think I would offer this audience is I would say that this game isn't all that different than what we've been doing for the last 10 years on trying to get these technologies to talk to each other,
Hmm.
right? And it's about coordination, right? If I've got, and let's just use the timeless example of marketing automation and CRM, right? Anyone who's listening to this podcast has probably done any number of integrations with any number of maps and any number of CRMs, and we can probably all have a horror story or several of trying to get those two to talk to each other, right? But if you do take the right amount of time and understand the timing and order of operations between the two, right? Like, obviously my career has been pretty heavily with Salesforce, right? That's the CRM I've used most often. Salesforce has a lot of things about it that are pretty um, routine, if you will, right? Between the way that it runs its processing queue to the amount of volume it'll handle at any given time, right? And in order to deploy Salesforce at scale, you need to know those things like the back of your hand, right? Because otherwise, you might start building a solution, whether it's declarative or custom developed, that isn't really compatible with the way the core system runs, right?
Mhm.
So I would say that there's really not a lot of apprehension that's warranted to say, like, don't turn on the AI or don't use that vendor's orchestration layer, but you need to understand it intimately because at the end of the day, what you're doing as a technologist is you are playing translator between vendor A and vendor B and the agents or orchestration layers within them. Now, there's always going to be space for maybe some sort of master orchestration layer that's then maybe essentially doing that job for you eventually, right? But you can't teach something to do something if you don't know how to do it yourself. So I would
Yep.
just say that you've got to know how these layers are and agentic workflows are operating at a very intimate level.
This episode was brought to you by our friends at Census. You probably have over 15 tools in your marketing tech stack, but how many of them have the full picture of your customer's journey? Census is the universal data layer in your stack. It unifies and cleans data from all your sources and makes it available for any app to use. Census makes it super easy to unify and standardize customer data, then enrich and enhance it, like running deduplication, cleaning, scoring, and routing workflows, and then sync and activate that data across all of your tools so you can actually do something with it. For marketers and data teams that work together to power big campaigns, it's so refreshing to work from a reliable source of truth. Don't just take my word for it though. Census is loved by awesome companies like HubSpot, Perplexity, Canva, Clay, Notion, and many more. Check them out at getcensus.com and tell them we sent you. This episode is brought to you by our friends at Knack. I have the amazing pleasure of chatting with some of the greatest minds in marketing operations, but you'd be shocked at how many of them have the same issues when it comes to their campaign creation process. They're dealing with things like scaling, personalization, keeping assets on brand, render testing emails, working in rigid templates, and worst of all, having to hand code emails. But many of the leaders in the space are using Knack to eliminate these headaches. Knack is a no-code email and landing page creation platform that covers initial campaign requests right until the sync to your marketing automation platform. Knack improves the whole campaign creation process by bringing the building, optimization, testing, collaboration, and also translation functions all in a single spot. So you don't have to jump around and coordinate feedback between a bunch of different people or wait on developers for very simple edits. Because at the end of the day, marketing ops folks want to focus on process and efficiency. Marketers want to focus on creativity, and Knack makes sure you get both and then some. Check them out at knack.com. That's KNAK, and tell them we sent you.
And because what I'm seeing out in the market now is people are using AI and companies are using AI just for the sake of it. It's just like, oh, you know, we should use AI, but we're not really sure what we're going to use it for. But we should use it. Otherwise, we're going to like either miss out or something like that. And so often, the core foundations of, sales and marketing plays, they're for many companies, they're just not that good, and they're missing some of these critical things. And that's what we really should be using AI for. Like what you're saying, the data organization, the infrastructure, making sure everything's formatted correctly so that we can run when we need to. But I think that, in so many places, and I get approached by founders all the time, and they're like, "Hey, can you let me show you this new AI tool?" And it's for something that like I didn't even want to do in the first place,
Hmm.
And I think that's kind of the theme that I'm kind of hearing is like, you're harping on like, let's get all of this, orchestration layer correctly. Let's get the data correct so that we can do things. But it seems like companies are just trying to, maybe sprint before they can even crawl. You know what I mean? Is that kind of?
I think there's a lot of validity to that premise. I'll offer I think what is an apt analogy. It's not a perfect one to one, but it's a good example of something that we probably I'm gonna say it in a moment, and anyone listening is gonna be like might even roll their eyes for a moment. But I'm gonna compare the future and the right way to approach agentic workflows to lead scoring
Mm.
and
Mhm.
specifically how you operationalize lead scoring. So I'll tell a quick story. Years ago, I'm at a sales kickoff, early stage company, one of those ones where I could do ops and tech at the same time, right? And I'm on stage at the kickoff unveiling our first ever lead score because we were that early stage. We hadn't had one yet. We hadn't needed one, right? And I got several questions during that session of like, why do I even need this? Right? I know what a good lead is. And I'm like, you do know what a good lead is, which is why we met with you and why you gave us all this great insight to inform this lead score. But tell me real quickly again, what do you do to determine what a good lead is, right? And of course, the seller, very good at what they do, is like, well, I check A and B and C and D. And I'm like, great. Well, the lead score did that. It outputted a score based on A, B, C, and D and values that we found there. And now you have a list from highest to lowest. So I can have you spending more of your time at the top of this list, working your way down, right? That's the same approach to the agentic workflow. It's like, hey, let's replace something that I do today as a human that frankly I do automatically or I
Yep.
do somewhat subconsciously, right?
Mhm.
Because if I do that correctly and do it at scale with an agentic approach, then now think about all of the time that I am freeing up for myself, my colleagues, my operations, my field team. That's where the unlock is, in my opinion. Because and people who are much smarter than me speak to this in really wonderful ways. But I think that the future of AI is really about unlocking new levels of human creativity. I think that is the real promise of what we are bringing with this technology.
Very cool. Great analogy. I think anyone listening probably has played a role in lead scoring. It was one of like my earliest intros into sales management
Same.
and sales process between like map and CRMs there. So let's say Keith, like someone is your mentee and they're asking you, like, you're so close to this tech, you're in the leading company in this space right now. What advice do you have for marketing ops, GTM practitioners to future proof their careers? All the stuff is moving so fast. Where should they be going to learn? Where do you go to learn? Curious your thoughts there.
Yeah, so I think I'll start by responding to that with more of a framework or a philosophy, if you will, to it. And my very first boss ever, the guy who was maybe dumb enough to give me that ops job, I think I did an okay job. He said so at least. So maybe it was a smart decision. I'm grateful for it. But he had a phrase that we lived by, and it was "do it, try it, fix it," which it feels like maybe it should be "try it, do it, fix it," but no, it is "do it, try it, fix it"
Hmm.
because we would just do the thing, right? And then we would keep trying or iterating and improving over time, right? So I would say this technology is so new, so paradigm shifting, changing so rapidly, and every vendor in the market is constantly trying to reinvent their version of the wheel with it. So you have to have this iterative, foundational, and build and build and build and build and build approach as part of just your core being of how you approach every business problem. And that may sound rather routine to others, but like it's really easy to like get presented with a business problem and try to boil the ocean, right? It's like, no, take the baby steps. Take the baby steps, validate that you're stepping in the right direction. And when you know that you are, then start to pick up the pace, right? So I'd say that's the beginning. And then I would say in terms of, just some things that have been really beneficial to me in terms of shaping my career, honing my skills as both a technologist and a leader of other technologists is first and foremost like community is a big thing. Like you just need to find your community. And I'm not saying that it means
Mhm.
you have to go out and join, the flashiest, loudest Martech or RevOps community on LinkedIn, right? I mean, find those humans that are doing the same job as you that you can have a bond with, that you can
Hmm.
share notes with, that you can bounce ideas off of. It's really no accident, even though it is somewhat organic in nature, that a lot of my close friends are fellow operators, right? And it's because we speak the same language and we're constantly getting value from each other, right? But at the same time, we're also individually and collectively learning some of the repeatable best practices that we can all speak to, right? So that's the next piece is that you gotta just there are good ways to do certain things that most people understand, languages that people speak, right? So learn those things so that you can repeat them over time. And then the last piece I would just say is like don't be afraid to fail. Like it's scary, it's really scary, but if you do that iterative approach, going full circle here, right? The failures in the beginning are smaller, the risk is
Yep.
lower, but the education is just as valuable.
Totally. Yeah, I there's like another way to say this is kind of like it's like kind of like declarative knowledge versus experiential knowledge, which is
Mm,
declarative is kind of like when you read about a thing, when you read about how to do something, but then it only helps to a point. It's kind of like reading about how to ride a bicycle. You can read tons and tons of books about how to ride a bicycle, but like you really haven't ridden one till you till you tried it. And I think that with a lot of people that are kind of I don't know, maybe more academic or maybe more like fear of failure, they'll study something so much, but they'll never actually go and try it. And that's why I love your
mm,
do it, try it, fix it framework. And I think the other thing too that's really great about that is a lot of times the skills that you learn along the way are transferable to other things. So when you're fixing your initial model or version or platform that you're launching, those skills that you're getting, that's like experiential knowledge that really compounds. So I think that your advice is right on, and people listening to this podcast should really like, you know, take that to heart and try. But like you said, it takes courage.
yeah,
It's
it
fear of
definitely
failure. Fear of failure is a real thing.
Mm.
it is a real thing, and but I want to like encourage the audience also with this caveat, which is that when you do fail, the memory of that failure and the lesson learned from it is visceral.
Mm.
It
Mm.
will go with you everywhere you are. A couple weeks ago in a like team weekly wrap up, the prompt I gave everyone was we're gonna do go to market system ghost stories. We're gonna go around the horn and no judgment. We're all gonna talk about a time that we built and deployed something that blew up on us. Um, and
Yep.
guess what? Everyone on the team had a story
Yeah.
immediately, right? And I remember the story I told then, I remember other stories that I have, and guess what? I don't make those mistakes anymore, right?
Mm.
Because they were so visceral and so painful in the moment, but guess what? Still here, I'm still growing. I've advanced in my career. So like you have to embrace the failure to a certain extent, or at least the potential for it.
Yeah, great
Yeah.
advice. Anyone who's worked on a marketing automation platform has a story around sending an email out to the wrong list or an unfiltered list. It's a
Yeah.
rite of
Forgot
passage.
about the suppression. Yeah.
Classic one there. Keith, I wanted to ask you about the death of SaaS, or
Mm,
like a lot of folks are talking about the dark age of Martech that might be coming because of AI. You probably read a story or two about this. Lots of folks are claiming that AI agents will usher in the death of SaaS. Obviously, Martech is a big category of SaaS. Some of the arguments made are that a lot of the SaaS Martech vendors and sales tech vendors are tools that address specific needs, like niche, comprehensive, like niche solutions, versus comprehensive platforms like Salesforce or HubSpot are often sometimes overkill or seen as overkill from some of these folks. Like their arguments is that AI powered DIY solutions or agents that are being built internally are going to replace a lot of these SaaS tools that address some of these like not minor but like smaller niche tactical needs. So not necessarily that like engineers are going to go off and build all these like in-house martech solutions, but that in a couple of years or already today a lot of these teams are equipped with more power, more capability to replicate in-house solutions from these martech and these SaaS tools without needing to buy them. What are your thoughts here? Are AI agents bringing on the death of SaaS, or do you think that's kind of bullshit?
I don't think it's bullshit, but I will say that I think the version of SaaS that many of us came up in is not going to be here for much longer.
Hmm.
So I'll say that, like, software as a service, buy 1,000 seats, do only XYZ with it. That is definitely going away, right? But at the same time, innovation only happens at the pace of its slowest individual to understand the value of that innovation. That
Hmm.
said, the pace is getting faster thanks to AI, right? We're able to do more with less time, which is great. But what I think is ultimately where we're headed is that these platforms will be changed forever. And it may mean that we need fewer point solutions. That could happen, right? Before ChatGPT broke the internet, we already knew that consolidation was happening, right? Vendors were buying each other or co-developing, products and features that mirrored their competitors or their adjacent solutions. Like that's just capitalism at play, right? Like that's going to happen. But I think agents and agentic workflows and agentic orchestration, it will be, the battle of the platform that does it best. Like that's a reality, right? The vendors that maybe are being perceived as overkill today that don't do it as well as the one that does probably will lose the battle to that player. That's a reality that I believe in. But at the same time, I'll say that you still do need these platforms to an extent. There's no getting rid of them forever, at least not anytime soon.
Yeah. I think that it the platforms themselves, my prediction is they will just, you know, consolidate the AI capabilities into the platform so that the work that humans do is more seamless. And that's the way that I see it. I don't know if I've ever shared this prediction, but like the I think that everything starts to converge to convenience. So, my prediction is actually in the future, probably like way in the future, but your phone just kind of does everything for you. And I don't know if you both of you watched Westworld, but in Westworld season 3, it's like a futuristic city and Dolores is walking around and she has like an agent in her ear and she just tells it what to do. You know what I mean? She's just like, "Can you buy this apartment for me?" And it just buys it. So, like, that's how I see, um, um, AI playing playing in the future, and why I don't think that I agree with you, Keith. Like, I don't think SaaS is going anywhere. It's just gonna be improved
Yes.
by AI. You know what I mean? So and I also don't buy this idea of, like, there's so many different agents and, like, there's this joke. It's like, have my agent call your agent, you know? And like, I just don't buy that. Like, it's just not convenient. It's confusing. So I really do think that the SaaS players will really embrace, and, our work will become easier, and it's not going to be this, let's all connect everybody's agents together like Legos.
I
And
will.
I know you like Legos, Keith.
I
So
do. I do love Legos. That's for sure. I will. I'll offer one slight counterpoint to that. I do think that there is a layer really far down on like the, let's just call it the microtransaction layer, if you will, where it may make sense for one agent to talk to another, right? Especially from one platform to the next. Like I think that is going to happen to a degree, but not to the level of SaaS is dead forever.
Hmm,
There's a
hmm,
big difference or big delta between those 2 points.
Hmm.
hmm.
Yeah, it'll have to happen in some shape to have a future where the CEO is running a one person company and their job is essentially just managing agents. A lot of folks are talking about this. Curious to ask you, like, how many years away are we from having the first startups be just a single CEO managing a bunch of agents?
Yeah, this is a fun one. I think to start off, in easy territory, I would say that it depends, but specifically, I would say it depends on the nature of the CEO,
Right.
right? So, if your question is how many years or how long till this is a more common reality, right? I would say that the sales slash revenue slash customer focus CEO, right? The person who's really good at getting on stage and delivering value propositions and meeting with their customers and conveying their need to the solution they offer, that person probably is a little bit further away from being able to do that because they're going to need the agents and the technology powering them to get good enough to the point where they can be that one person company, right? But then if we think about more of like the operational focus leader, they're going to be able to see the building bricks, if you will, to these platforms a little bit more clearer just by nature of their expertise, right? They're all about plugging A to B equals C, that sort of thing. And then you have the technical leaders, right? Those are going to be the people who do it first, because they're the ones that's how what they're thinking about with their technology, right? Is how do I multiply the force of human or humanity on behalf of the technology that I'm building. Um, and I think those folks will be doing some version of it much sooner, but there will be a sliding scale of adoption, just like there is anything in the market and in society in general.
I was
Yeah.
letting you ask the next one there,
Oh yeah,
Daryl.
of course, of course. Let's talk about. I like this question. Let's talk about the qualification of ideas, which is a really interesting topic. Um, so there's a ton of projects that we have to do. There there's at any given time there's probably, I don't know, 50 plus things that you can do when it comes to GTM systems. How do you think about qualifying, prioritizing, um, resourcing these projects? What comes to mind when you think of, okay, this is a must do, and then this one, we can actually put on the back burner. Can you tell us a little bit about your qualification framework, Keith?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that there are three dimensions to this. The first is what you have to have, which and you really can't get anywhere to any degree of repeatable, reliable prioritization without it. But you've got to have a true north. You got to know what are your existential problems or what are the really well defined goals of your team, your business, the organization that you serve, right? You got to know what direction you're walking in, or running in, maybe. But after that, I would say it comes down to understanding the degree of need, or maybe what I often like to refer to, at least in the realm of like buying third party technology, product need fit. So, does the product fit the need, right? That's a whole practice unto itself. And I have a lot of ideas and processes and methodologies on how to determine that, and I could probably do a whole podcast about that. But I would say after that point, once you determine if product need fit is there, and product could be the internal solution as well, right? Doesn't necessarily have to be third party. Next, you have to understand the complexity of it, right? So if you know that I have this problem, I have this product that meets the need, but it's an insanely complex thing to do, then guess what? You get to do that thing and maybe nothing else, right?
Hmm.
But you may find that I have this need and I have these four products available to me that are of lesser complexity. And maybe they each offer cumulatively more value than that single product that's insanely complex. So I'm going to do all four of these versus that one thing. And then there's
Hmm.
not necessarily a fourth overall dimension, but I do tend to ask this question like, what happens if we don't do it?
Mm.
Like, what happens if we don't buy the thing or we don't build the thing?
Hmm.
Like,
Hmm.
will we be okay without it? There are a lot of things in this life and in my professional work that I really want to do, right? I'll give you, a really practical example. I've been at OpenAI for a little around 18 months now, right? I was the founding member of our go-to-market systems team. I've had the privilege of building this team up. And while we've been doing that, we've been walking a really fine balance of how much process to embrace for ourselves, right? I love process. I love spreadsheets. I love methodology. So like I would love to do every ounce of process to have a beautiful board of knowing where everything is. And if you select this is at risk, you do this and all of that. But guess what? We're okay without most of that. We're
Hmm.
doing really good work at the same time. So you do need to ask that question and be really truthfully honest with yourself and your team and your organization. What happens if we don't do it? Will we be okay if we don't? And that's just you gotta answer, you gotta ask and answer that question.
Yeah. And
Such a good point.
I assume like, and this is probably, uh, you know, just like laying this one up, but I assume you're also like iterating with ChatGPT when you're doing like the prioritization,
Oh yeah,
um,
for
and
sure.
the risk analysis. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's like when you do find that thing that is a little bit more turnkey, and you're like, okay, this is how I approach this particular question or problem each time. You're probably in, again, being selfishly promoting OpenAI's technology, I would say you're probably in GPT territory. Like that means if you're feeling pretty routine or repeatable
Yeah.
about what you're doing, then go build a darn GPT and tell it how to do that and what inputs to ask
Mhm.
of you and what outputs to provide you in return.
Yeah, yeah, love that. I actually have a custom GPT for helping me define the effort that takes for a certain task. Like this is something I've always sucked at in my career, and a lot of folks like deciding prioritization frameworks. Like the effort factor in this is so hard to gauge when we've never done it before. And so what I'll do is I'll like give a list of tasks and the effort that I think each task takes, and then I'll ask GPT to tell me like what am I not thinking about. And then there's always a couple in there that I didn't
Yes.
think about, and then I just like reprompt it like based on these things that I didn't think about, what else am I not thinking about, and which of these tasks do you think could take a lot longer because of external factors that we're not thinking about. And like this
Hmm.
whole like exercise of iteration and back and forth, I think is really helping the effort estimation, because like any engineering team or like Martech technology team knows that you can always 2x the amount of effort or time you think it's going to take to implement something, right?
It's so interesting, Phil, because I've heard people say, and I'll spoil alert, I agree with this statement that like AI, even in its current state, is at the same scale of benefit, if you will, that the introduction of the internet was, right?
Mm,
Because with the internet, we were connecting humanity and we were storing the collective knowledge of our species somewhere that, and obviously there's tons of problems to solve about access to the internet and increasing that connectivity, but that was a paradigm shift, right? But
Yeah.
now we've made that thing conversational,
mm,
right? Now we have
Mm.
something. I can't. I wish I could give credit to the person who I saw this post. They were like, "Why aren't you using ChatGPT? It has almost the entirety of human knowledge at its disposal. Ask it any question you want. Ask it to double check its answer. Like gut check it yourself. The same way when you read a news headline, maybe you should check the source of that headline, right? But like it's all there. So like, just ask the darn question because
Yeah.
worst case scenario, you get an answer you don't want to use, and now you know not to use that answer.
mm. Yeah, such a good point. I also love your product need fit that you kind of outlined there in the qualification process. Maybe two last questions for you, Keith. Like on this product need fit, I think that there's a nice transition to buying Martech, and something that you've mentioned in our pre-interview is like you've really honed in and become an expert at buying Martech and RevTech, and it's almost an art in and of itself, right? Like talk to us about what makes your buying process different, unique? What prompts or CTAs do you have members on the team filling out? Like, walk us through that.
Yeah, I'm such a big fan of this process, and I can't take full credit for it. For the record, I have been inspired by my colleagues and peers who have helped me hone this practice over time. But I'll, for the sake of time, I'll highlight one particular aspect of how I like to approach buying technology that I think is particularly fun because it's a beautiful, I think, intersection of AI and humanity, and a really cool cognitive exercise to make sure that you are, to my earlier point of like you need that uh directional guidance. You need to know where you're going so you can assess product need fit. But what CTA that I have everyone do when they're involved in a buying cycle is I say, okay, first of all, we're going to frame conceptually the problem that we're approaching here, right? Like what business problem are we trying to solve? Like let's just make sure we all understand that in some really concise bullets. Once you have that, I'm going to ask you from your perspective, whether you're a marketer, a salesperson, in RevOps, systems, whatever have you, from your professional perspective, I'm going to ask you to just spend 10, 15 minutes in a doc and give me your must haves and your nice to haves. Write them down for me. Okay. That sounds simple. That sounds routine, but this is where the fun part happens.
Hmm.
I say, okay, once you've done that, once you've written it down, and you might have been talking to yourself a little bit, you might have been just thinking silently while you're doing this. I now want you to record yourself narrating what you wrote down because two things are going to happen, at least two things. One, you're going to add context. When you read what you wrote, some other, even if it's just an extra 2%, is going to come out of your mouth. Or
Hmm.
you may introduce something that didn't make it on paper the first time,
Hmm.
right? And now I have two really rich sources of perspective. I have the more static exercise of just write the thing down, and then I have the thing that came out of your brain while you were just like thinking about it, right? And reading what you yourself wrote.
Like
I
video record or
Yeah,
audio
yeah.
record?
Audio's fine. I like
Okay.
video just because you if you're on video, right, you're gonna be a little bit more mindful of your inflections, of your things like that. But I think audio's fine too. It works either way. But so I have everyone fill out a doc like that. It's a template, and then I have them record themselves narrating it,
Hmm.
and then I take both of those and I give that to GPT,
Mm.
and I say, okay, here's Phil's doc, here's Phil's video, here's Phil's background. This is the role that Phil is playing in this buying team. Go ahead and synthesize those two, and also do that for everyone else who's in the same role as Phil, by the way. And then further synthesize all of that together to come out with
Hmm.
a really cool list of requirements.
Very
And
cool.
Like,
that's what we then hold vendors and zero party and first party solutions against.
So cool.
yeah, that's why I love these interviews. Like, I'll always learn something, like a new way to do something that I never thought of.
Yeah, Keith, love that answer. I had a super short stint at WordPress.com. We are async written communication for a lot of stuff. And what I found sometimes is that you don't get the full context when you're just writing stuff. So really like your answer. Daryl, happiness question?
Yeah. Okay, so Keith, you're a GTM Systems leader, an advisor, a well-traveled speaker. You're also a Lego fanatic, avid cyclist, Severance superfan, and a newer runner. One question we ask everyone on the show is, how do you remain happy and successful in your career? How do you find balance between all things that you're working on while still staying happy?
Yeah, that's a really, really wonderful question. So I'll say in terms of like how do I make sure that I'm staying happy, and I would actually say and fulfilled in my
Mm.
career. So two things. One, I need interesting problems to solve, right? Most humans need some sort of stimulus, if not all humans need some sort of stimuli to like keep them interested, right? And it needs to be interesting to a certain degree. So I would say first and foremost, I just try to make sure that I have interesting problems to solve that I feel rewarded for playing a role in solving, right? But I also have to make sure that I can have some degree of balance, right? I know work-life balance is a hot button issue, and I'm not going to try to go all the way down that route. But you said I'm a newer runner, right? But I've also been an avid cyclist. That means I'm an endurance athlete. That means that I know what happens when you go too hard, too long.
Mhm.
You crash and you burn, and you can't get up the next day or get back on the bike or back on the road, right? I'm gonna do a 9.5 mile run tomorrow. You know what that means I'm not doing on Sunday? Running 9.5 miles again. So it's a balance for me of making sure that I'm interested, that I feel that I have a reason to invest, but also that I can push myself to a point where I have time to pull back and recover, right? And then in terms of like how do I find that balance? It's intentionality at the end of the day. I have to carve that out for myself. So I'm a calendar freak. I block my calendar off, right?
Nice.
My calendar is blocked off until 7 a.m. Eastern and after 7 p.m. Now I make it clear, like, hey, if you really need me, I'm not going to say, no, I never take a call after 7 o'clock, right? I took a 7 p.m. call last night, but I also don't do that every day,
Yeah.
right? So it's about knowing when to sprint, knowing when to jog, knowing when to walk, and knowing when to lay your ass down and get some rest.
Awesome advice, Keith. This interview has flown by. Really appreciate your time. Folks are gonna get a ton of value out of this. We'll link out to your LinkedIn. I know you've got some upcoming talks, so folks should follow you. Thank you so much for your time, Keith.
Thank you for having me. It's been a privilege.